All right, so now we've got these people showing up in a list in our browser, but it doesn't look very nice, does it? So in this lesson, at least the first thing I want to do in this lesson is show you how you can make something like this look a lot better without a whole lot of effort. I hope you won't think it's too much effort at least. So we're going to learn a little bit about something called CSS frameworks, okay? And I'm going to introduce you to one of the most famous or most popular CSS frameworks, which is called Bootstrap. Now, we're not gonna really truly learn a whole bunch of Bootstrap. We're just gonna make use of it and you're just gonna follow me, okay? So keep in mind, this whole entire section is really just a big template where I'm just gonna give you here's how you can make things that look a certain way or whatever, okay? Real quick though, CSS. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. This is one of the top technologies associated with the web. So the first one that we've kind of learned here is HTML. I mean, we haven't learned it, but you've been introduced to it if you weren't already familiar with it, right? So here's some of our HTML, okay? But there's another technology that is strongly associated with HTML, which is CSS. CSS allows us to style our HTML, or the output of it rather, okay? So we can use CSS to specify not what should be on the page, but how it should look, okay? And to a certain extent, even where on the page it should be, okay? So colors, sizes, positions, things like that can all be handled by CSS. CSS has a reputation of being fairly notoriously difficult to understand or learn. And as a result, there are now a number of CSS frameworks which try to make it a lot easier to do useful things with CSS without having to become a CSS genius, okay? And one of the most popular, if not the most popular possibly, of these frameworks is Bootstrap. So we're going to incorporate a little bit of Bootstrap into this page and make it look a lot nicer. And the main thing we're going to do in particular is we're going to convert this ordered list of people into a table of actual people, okay? All right, so let's jump into that. All right, so the first thing we'll do is jump over to the other Chrome browser, Chrome tab I have here, and I'm gonna open up another tab and I will search for Bootstrap 5, which is, as of the time of this recording, that is the most recent version of Bootstrap. Okay, so, and I happen to have jumped right onto the documentation, but if you happened to land on the home page, which is here under home, then you can just click on docs, just like that, okay? And the first thing we need to do is kind of, again, sort of like import Bootstrap into our page. Now, this will be done differently than what we did with that Thymeleaf stuff, and you'll see what that is in just a moment here. So thankfully, they give us some pretty nice documentation on how to get started. So right here under Quick Start, if you just come down here, we've got this CSS stuff that they say we can copy and paste into a link into our head. So all we're going to do is come over here and click copy, okay? Then jump back over to the IDE, and we're going to find the head of our HTML, which is right here, okay? And so you can paste that line anywhere in between these two, anywhere in between these two head tags here, the opening and closing head tag, okay? So I guess I'm gonna just put mine right underneath the title there. So I'm just gonna paste that right in, okay? Like so. Then I'm going to jump back over to the browser. And now I also want to grab this JavaScript here. So this is a third technology that is strongly associated with the web. Okay, so we've got HTML and then CSS, and then probably the third big one is JavaScript. In order to gain the full functionality of this Bootstrap CSS framework, there is a bit of JavaScript that is associated with it that they wrote. We don't have to write it, we can just use it, okay? But we do have to kind of import it into our HTML. And so here's a little line that we can copy and paste into our page for that. So again, I'm gonna come over here and just click copy and then jump back over to the IDE. All right, so we will go ahead and paste that right underneath the link in the head as well. So right there. Some of you who are already very familiar with HTML and JavaScript and CSS might traditionally prefer to put your script tag somewhere towards the bottom here, and you can still do that, but you do not have to. All right. especially not for this very simple implementation that we're doing here. Okay, so now that's all it takes to make use of the Bootstrap framework. Okay, so now we'll go back over to the documentation, and what we want to do is to make use of a table. Okay, so we're going to show those people in a table. And so in order to do that, we can come down here to, I think it's no, I never get it right. It's content, down here to content, and then tables. So they've got many nice looking templates, if you want to think of it as that, for various types of tables, okay? And one of the easiest things that you can do, or it's what I do, is usually just find some example that I like and then just copy that text and then just copy that HTML. So I clicked on copy there, and then I will jump back over here to the IDE and come over to the body tag, and maybe for now, right underneath this ordered list that I already have, I'll put a couple of spaces there. I will just paste this example table here, okay? Now I'd like to go ahead and see that right away. So let me bring back open the smaller window that I had there, which is right here, and plus the IDE. Okay, so there we go. So now I will just trigger the program to restart very quickly, and hopefully it should refresh. So let's see. I'm doing a Command F9 or Control F9 for Windows and Linux. There we go. Okay. And yeah, so there's our table, and it looks pretty much just like on the other page where we got it from. All right, now I don't like the fact that this table is taking up the entire width of the browser window. I would like to make it a little less wide than the browser window. So one way that I can do that is I can actually select the entire table. So I'm actually just putting my cursor, there, let me do that again. I'm going to put my cursor anywhere on this table. I don't even have to be on the word. I can just be anywhere at all within the table tag. And then I can use the selection capability that you've seen me use many times before, where at least on Mac, I'm doing an Option and up arrow, which is a Control W for Windows and Linux. And I'm going to keep selecting until I've got the whole thing here. So everything, this entire table, right? So if I scroll down, you can see that I've selected the entire table. Okay. And then I'm going to do an Option Command T, which is surround with, or Control Alt T for Windows and Linux. And then I will do a surround with, and I'm going to introduce a div tag here. Now divs, you can imagine that a div is basically like just a box, okay? And anything, any content that I have inside of this div is content that will be inside of what is, for right now, an imaginary box inside of the browser window, okay? So I'm just making a box that I can specify other things about, like how wide or how tall or what color, whatever, all kinds of things like that, okay? So I'm making a generic box, and in this box, I will now specify some CSS classes, okay? So in CSS, a class is a descriptor for how you want things to be decorated, okay? And that's maybe all I'm going to say about that for right now. So I'm going to specify a class, and I'm going to specify now how wide I want this div container to be. Now, the way that the Bootstrap framework works is that it subdivides your browser window into 12 columns of equal width. Okay, no matter how wide the browser window is, there will always be these 12 invisible columns, okay? And so when you know that there are these 12 columns here, you can specify how wide you want items in the browser window to be in terms of those columns, okay, by specifying how many columns wide do you want something to be. So if I want this table here to be perhaps 8 columns wide, I can actually use a Bootstrap class and say col-8, okay? And then if I want it to be centered, I can use another CSS class, mx-auto. Now this mx-auto, what it's going to do is it's specifying that the horizontal, that's what this X means, the horizontal margin around this imaginary box here, or this invisible box, should basically take up equal amounts of space on the left and the right hand side of this box, okay? If you don't understand that, that's okay. You can just copy me. If you ever want something centered, okay, you can do an MX-auto in many cases, all right? So let's see if this does what we're wanting here. I'm gonna restart the application again. There we go. Look at that. Okay, so now the table is not so unwieldy, okay? All right, so now the next thing I want to do is to templatize this table because we just, copied it statically into our document here. But now let's kind of, customize it a bit. So we've got a header row, which is this row here, okay? And that's what is defined underneath this T-head tag here, okay? So there's the header section of the table. And then within that header section, we've got one row defined, okay? So it's kind of the header row is the one row. I guess you could have multiple rows. I don't know that I've ever done that before, but I suppose you could. All right. And then we've got each of the columns here. So we've got this number sign column and first and last and handle and all of this, right? So we're going to customize this now. So let's start off with the last name field first. So I'm going to just do an Option Shift down arrow to change the order of these guys. And I want this column heading to be called last name. And then the next one will be first name. And then the next one can be, let's see, I guess date of birth. And I will just call it DOB like that. And what else do we have there? The salary, okay? And then so I just did a Command D to duplicate that line, the DOB line, to make another column. And then I will call this one salary, like so, okay? And actually, maybe I will change this number sign to ID, okay? Like so. All right, so that's the end of that row and the end of the header section of the table. And then we enter the body section of the table, okay? So that's where all of the actual data goes, right? And so now what you see is each row is in its own table row. That's what TR stands for, table row section, if you will, okay? So since it's the table rows that should be repeating, I'm going to re-implement the Thymeleaf :each attribute that we used earlier to repeat things, like what we did right here, this list item th: each. So this list item thing here is functionally equivalent to the table rows here, okay? That's kind of the same thing. So really, we could just copy at least all of this. I'm going to leave this bit out for now, and you'll see why in just a moment, but I do want all of this. So I'm going to come down here to the first table row, and I will paste that right there. All right. And so now, in order to make all of the actual data here dynamic, I will pretty much do what we did up here, but I'm going to do it a little bit differently. So I can copy this like so, and then come down here. But instead of putting it on this table row, which wouldn't make sense here, I'm going to put it on each of these table cells, okay? Starting with this one right here, and it doesn't really matter where inside of the tag I put this, I'll just put it right there. Now, the data that I actually want is not the whole entire person anymore. Now I want to actually extract individual fields of the person because this data cell right here should convey the ID, right? And so now what I can do, I put my cursor right after that word person there, and I can just do person.id to pull that ID out, okay? And then I can just keep doing that. So here on the next table cell, I can paste again. In fact, maybe I'll go ahead and just paste all of these now. Like so. All right, so then the next bit of data that I will want is the last name. Notice I'm using Java standard, camel case here. Okay, so that way the Thymeleaf templating engine knows how to find the getter method for a field called last name. Okay, and then the first name, and then I think I did date of birth, DOB. And then I will duplicate that line. And then the last one that I wanted is salary, like so, right? Now notice, I don't have to get rid of the static data that I have here. I don't have to do that. And this is one of the things that's nice about the Thymeleaf framework if you work in a particular way, okay? So real quick side note, a lot of developers who do web development will work with web designers who often are more expert at creating pretty HTML, and they may be very, very good at CSS, better than the typical Java developer might be, but they may not be programmers, okay? And so some companies and organizations will have combinations of developers who know how to do what I'm showing you here, but they don't know how to make really beautiful looking HTML layouts and all of that, okay? And so they will be paired up with a web designer who does know how to make things look pretty, but they're not a programmer. And when you are paired with someone like that, typically what they will do is they will deliver to you some beautiful static HTML. And by static, I mean like the HTML that I just pasted in here, right? It's not dynamic. It's just like a screenshot of some beautiful example of how an HTML page could look. And then it becomes your job to make that page become dynamic so that it can show different kinds of data, which is what we're doing right now, right? We're tying in all of our data from the back end. By the way, the back end, that means our Java code that's kind of running behind the browser, okay? So when these web designers deliver you these web pages that are static and look beautiful, if you're working in this particular way where, and I'll talk more about some of the distinctions of how we can develop web pages and web applications and stuff a little bit later. But if you're working in this particular way, you're gonna take those pages and just basically throw them into your application, pretty much like we're doing here. But then you're gonna have to add in things to make them dynamic. Now, sometimes you will have to work in a back and forth kind of a way with the web designers where they deliver version 1 of their design, and then you incorporate your things into it, and then you demo what you have to your business stakeholders or whoever the customer is or someone representing the customer, okay? You'll demo that, but they may ask for changes, and the changes that they may ask for may be changes that have to be implemented or that should be implemented by the web designers. So what can happen is you don't want that web designer, if you can help it, to go back to their original version of their file and then make changes and then give that back to you, because now you have to go back and put all of this stuff in there again, right? Every single time they make any little change. And that's cumbersome and annoying and a waste of the company's time and money. What would be nicer is if you could edit what they gave you and then share that back with them. But if you do that, you want to make your changes in such a way that those changes don't negatively impact them, so that when they open up whatever tool they use to make their web page, they can still see how it was supposed to look statically, okay? And so one of the great things that the Thymeleaf framework does is it allows us to add in this dynamic functionality, this dynamic templating functionality to an otherwise static HTML page without having to necessarily change any of the original dummy static HTML that was already there. So if I were to give this back to a web designer and they opened up this page not using Java, but just in a plain old web browser, the web browser would simply ignore all of this stuff that I've added in. Anytime a web browser encounters things like HTML attributes that it doesn't understand, it just ignores them by default, okay? And so that gives you a potentially nice way to work hand in hand with web designers such that you're not having to hopefully anger them by grossly modifying everything that they did. They can still see everything the way that they intended to see it. You can still see everything the way that you need to see it to work with your Java, and you can both work off of the same code base. So maybe you're working in a repository in GitHub or something like that. So sorry for the long-windedness of that, but I wanted you to understand why a framework like Thymeleaf in particular could be really great if you happen to work in that kind of a mode. Now, if you're a full stack developer who does not work with the web designers and you are expected by your company or whomever to do all of the HTML layout and everything else yourself, then that particular capability of Thymeleaf might not be of much use to you. Okay. But if you do work in that kind of environment, this is a very, very awesome technology that you can use. So let's go ahead and restart and see what we get. I may be forgetting something, I never can tell. And that's the nice thing about this kind of round trip approach. Oh, look at that. I think that's looking pretty okay for the most part. Now notice, I did not get rid of these additional static rows yet. Okay, I've left those in. So the browser is just trying to do its best to figure out what to do with those bits of data because I've modified the table definition a bit there. But we can see all of our data, 10, 20, 30, 40, all of the people there, right? So that's kind of cool. And in fact, now, if we, let's see, if we go back over to the controller and let's add 1 or 2 more people in here just to have some fun. Let's see, let's do Jerry McGuire. And I don't know, I'm just going to change that date to, let's find 1997. And let's go lady, I don't know, Smith. Jane Smith. And I won't even change the birth date at this time. And then if I just do a Command F9, look at that. Yep, there they are. Yep, so there's Jerry Maguire and Jane Smith. Whoops, and I guess I put their names in. Did I do Jane Smith backward? Oh, I sure did, didn't I? Yep. Yeah, I did that backward. Let's restart that again. Where'd she go? There she is, Jane Smith. Okay, now we got the last name showing up properly. All right, so that's a lot of great functionality that we got for not a whole lot of work, really. And that table looks way, way better. And in fact, now let's get rid of the original display that we were doing up here. Okay, so we'll jump back into the IDE, jump back over to the people.html file, and let's find, there it is. So let's get rid of all of this. Whoops, grabbed a little too much there. Let's get rid of the here are some people bits and then the ordered list there. So I'm just going to delete all of that and restart again. There we are. Okay, now let me explain a tiny little bit more now about the, what was the dependency? I forgot what it was called already. Hold on a second here. One of the dependencies that we selected when we were first creating this project in the start.spring.io thing. So we can actually see those dependencies if we open up the build.gradle file here. All those dependencies will actually be right here, right? So there's Spring Data JPA and Thymeleaf, Validation Web, Lombok. Yes, it was this one here, Spring Boot DevTools, okay? So let me just reiterate a little bit further now. So every time we make a change and I do a Command F9, that is triggering IntelliJ to come up here to build, and it is rebuilding the project, okay? That's what that's doing. And actually, I could just rebuild an individual file. In fact, if I were on a file that could be rebuilt, I think that's actually what the Command F9 does. Let me make sure here. If we come up here to build, oh, yeah, I have to do a Shift Command F9 actually. Okay, so technically I probably should be doing a Shift Command F9 so that I will only recompile the one file that I'm on rather than the entire project. So the DevTools thing is really just enabling us to be able to quickly rebuild our project very quickly. It does some class loading tricks that I'm not going to get into so that Java will not have to reload every single class every single time you rebuild the project, and it will only reload essentially those classes that have changed, and therefore the time to restart the application server, which is the thing that's responding to the browser requests and all of that, the time to restart all of that is much quicker than it might otherwise have been. And it also has this little live reloader server process that's running in the background. And our browser has that live reload plugin that we installed, okay? And so that enables the browser to become aware that something has changed on the quote unquote back end, which again is our Java code, okay? We've changed something, and then that will trigger the browser to refresh the page without us having to tell it to do so, okay? And that way we get a quicker round trip or a quicker turnaround between making changes in the Java code and seeing those changes take place in the browser much more quickly than they would otherwise do if we were not using the DevTools or some other trick. Now, there's at least one product, one commercial product that I'm aware of that can enable this level of fast turnaround in development as well. But that costs money, and this is all free. All right, so now that we've got all of this working, I think we're going to stop right here, and we will pick back up with this and I will show you some more neat techniques, and we'll dive a little deeper into some more of the philosophical aspects of this type of development, okay? So I will see you in the next one. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this content and you'd like to help me out, there are several ways you could do that. First, you can always click the like and subscribe. That'll help me out a lot. Additionally, another way you can help me out is to check the link in the description below. That'll link you to my website where you can find additional courses. And finally, for those of you who might be interested in starting a new career as a professional software developer, I offer a free PDF guide that will detail exactly how you can get started in this field with no college degree and no prior experience. All you need to do is click on the link in the description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.